so close, I believe you're holding me now in your hands. I belong. You'll never let me go.
Now, Joel and Dana, why don't you come up and join me here? We don't have a set agenda. We don't have a script that we're going to go by. We want to be able just to talk about race and what, where we're at now. And each one of us has our own experiences that we want to share about, but I mean, we haven't rehearsed anything, we haven't talked about anything, so this is really led by the Spirit of God and see where it goes. We want to be open with questions and have a dialogue as much as possible. There are some concerns I have. One is, I don't even know how to voice my concern really, but I know I've been in situations. I'm on the Diversity and Equity Committee for the clinic that I work for. That's just started because of all this stuff that's been going down. And there is one outspoken black lady that's on this committee as well. And sometimes I feel like I don't have a voice because who am I to speak to her experience? And how do we, so sometimes having a black person in the room when we're talking about race will limit us from being able to say the things that we think it's saying. And I want to get beyond that somehow. I'm not really sure how to do that, other than just acknowledge that we want to have a free dialogue. And we're going to share our experiences. My experience is different than Dana's experience, is different than Joel's experience, is different than your experience. And we want to be able to share our experiences without judgment, without anyway. So,
do you want me to start off by telling my experience for?
Yeah, there's one experience that Joel has that he is a great storyteller of, and particularly Dana had a strong reaction to it. So go ahead and tell your story.
We all three had different reactions.
We all had different reactions.
So,
Is this being recorded?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So, of course, you guys are, I believe, Mark, if you were aware that for a little while I used to live in Vancouver,
Right.
and while I was there, I had, of course, several roommates, Dawson, Nathan, Tyler, and we decided, hey, we're going to go to the beach on the river, have fun. We had some of our friends come, like the Pilgers and a group of us, young adults. And so, of course, during this time, I was, of course, getting used to myself and in the fact that I am lactose intolerant. So,
Wonderful.
yeah. So, if you can guess, that's where it's going. Sorry.
You guys know the results of being lactose intolerant?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, yes. So, we all headed to the beach. We're all hanging out. A group of us were in my car. And we were thinking now we were going to go swimming, so we're all in swimming trunks and all that. We hang out on the beach for several hours. We're having a great time. And I'm drinking just soda. Okay, this is fine. But somehow that still affected my system. And I was like, ooh, I can feel the thunderclouds, you know, but I should be okay. But, you know, it's like, it's way off. We're fine. I think everyone's packing up. It's starting to get cold out. Of course, it was summer, but it gets cold on the river and stuff. Yeah. So we're like, okay, you know, half an hour, I'm good. Well, of course, everyone's talking, hanging out, finally pack up, get to the car. Nope, that half an hour was, I was being optimistic. No, I'm thinking maybe 10 minutes. But of course, you know, I don't want to just end the party quickly for everyone, so I'm trying to be polite and everything like that. And they're still talking, having no idea of the situation that's going on in the back of my mind. And so we get to the car and they're still talking. I'm like, nope, I was still being optimistic. I've maybe got 5 minutes. hey Nathan, we've got to go really, like right now, it's a really big emergency, like lactose problem emergency. And he's also lactose intolerant, so he saw the sweat beating down my face and the panic in my eye. And he was like, okay, everyone pile in my car, we're going now. And of course, you know, you try to be polite in the parking lot and try to follow the speed limit. I was not doing that, I'm sorry. I left the parking lot probably going 40, and the speed limit on the road was probably 35, and I was probably doubling that minimum. I was really in trouble. And it's like, okay, it's 5-10 minutes to our house. I definitely can't make that. Where's the nearest restroom? Nathan's like, I remember there's a Chevron. Hang a left over here. I take the corner at about 90. Pull into the parking lot. Don't shut off the car. Just pull up in front, throw it in park, sprint in the door. And I guess I was just talking to Andrew, a friend of ours. I was probably in there about a half an hour just surviving. But I get out of the restroom and the lights are off. And I kind of just walk out and I'm like that odd kid just totally lost, like, why are the lights off? When I came in here, I saw the guy behind the counter. He looked totally bored, you know, it was about 9 o'clock or something. And, well, a guy comes up to the door, and I was like, oh, that must be the employee. Get to the door, door's locked. Now I'm really confused, like, why is the door locked on a Chevron at, I don't know, 9:30 at night? And he's like, hey, open up, I need change to put air in my tire. He had a flat tire. I was like, wait, no, you're supposed to open it up and let me out, like, what's going on? And a few minutes we're going back and forth, and then Nathan and Andrew and Nathan's girlfriend Jada come up, and they realize the whole situation. I got locked in a Chevron because I had to run to the restroom. And so we spent about 10 minutes figuring out, like, okay, well now what? Like, where'd the employee go? What's going on? And we're like, well, how do I get out of here? So of course, we look around and we find a fire exit. Of course, you know, they've got the alarms on the door and the sticker on there. And so we're like, well, we don't really want to just open the door and leave, set off the fire alarm, what's going on. So we call up the number, and they're like, well, we can't find that location on our security. And I said, we got the number off the sticker, I mean, what do we do? And they're like, well, don't take anything, just leave. Okay. So we're like, well, I mean, option A is set off the fire alarm. Option B is I get comfortable and the poor employee will have a big surprise in the morning when he comes in to open up in the morning.
Yeah.
So anyway, we like, well, it's a one-way door. We left, went on our way, ran home, and everyone else who was at the beach was at our house long before us, and everyone, where in the world are these guys? Like, they took off really fast. How in the world are they got here? So, and that was my story. That's how I got locked in a Chevron.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Joel says fire alarm, but security alarm. So he comes home and he tells us the story. And of course, everybody laughs because it's funny, just like you guys laugh. But the mama didn't laugh because the mama went, oh my gosh, when are the police going to come to my door? And when is my son going to be arrested? And every time I heard an alarm for about a year, I panicked because I thought my son was going to be arrested. And so it's a funny story now, and I can laugh now. But I want to tell you I didn't laugh then. You know, because my son is this gorgeous black man that has done nothing but be born black, of course, you know, but people aren't going to know that when they see him.
Yes, but I also did get myself locked in a Chevron.
You know, that was the worker's responsibility. He should check the bathroom. You know, and all I can think of is, okay, they're gonna see this black man on the security cameras, right?
Right.
And they're gonna see him walking through this door. And when are they gonna come and get him?
Sure.
My reaction is like, I listened to the story and I just was rolling over in laughter. And I did not even think of the implications of what people would think when they saw a young black man in a convenience store. That didn't cross my mind.
Yeah.
It wasn't until Dana told me her concern. It's like, oh. And then I started thinking about, just last night when we were talking about what we're going to talk about here, we were talking about what would happen if one of Dana's cousins, with one of his experiences, experienced the exact same scenario of being in the bathroom for a long time and then coming out and being locked into a convenience store, and how he would respond and what would go through his mind because of his experiences in being raised in LA. It's very different than how I would respond.
Yeah.
Right, and I have to say, this story with Joel happened very close to a time when Devin was traveling. And Devin had flown to Europe with my niece, and on his way back, he was in Germany. And if you guys have seen my son over the years, you know he expresses himself with his hair.
Right.
And so his passport, we got when he was under our guidance of his hair. And so it's clean shaven, right? But his driver's license,
I should also add in with those, driver's license, short hair, no beard.
no beard, yes. But with his, no, that's his passport,
Oh,
short
yes,
hair.
yes.
His driver's license, he has an afro.
Nothing wrong with that.
But when he went to Europe, he had dreads.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Oh, I like it.
And so Customs saw my son and said, oh, you're a terrorist. These are not you. This is not the same person. And they held him for 45 minutes, and he almost missed his flight to get home. Right now, my son is not a terrorist, right? But you guys know him, and you watched him through these transformations of hair.
Right.
And so then that happened, and then Joel has his experience, and this mama realizes that she has two gorgeous black sons that the world don't see the way she sees them.
How about sharing about your experiences growing up, where you grew up, and what were you taught about the police, and what was the common thought?
I mean, I'm a girl, so I had the kind of the conversation, not the conversation that the guys have. When you guys say, oh, did you have the talk? The talk is not the sex talk. The talk is when you see a cop, either if you can run, you run. If they stop you, you put your hands in the air. If you're in a car, you put your hands on the steering wheel. You do not move until they can see you and they can see both of your hands. If they tell you to roll down your window, you move very, very slowly and make no quick moves at all, because you could be the next person on the ground, right? But generally, you're taught to get the hell out of there whenever a cop shows up. They are not your friends. And that's the talk that I had that my mom and my grandmother had with me when I was 12 years old. And when I talked to my kids when they started driving, you move slowly. You don't just trust a cop because they're a cop. And I trust the police, don't get me wrong, but that's how I was raised. And I would err on the side that they're out to protect me more than anything.
Excuse me, Jim? Where was home when you were being raised?
Los Angeles,
Okay.
Yeah.
actually Compton to be more specific. So,
Compton,
Compton,
1964, they had riots down there.
they did, I know.
My dad and I sat on my grandmother's porch with his shotgun in Highland Park, which is not that far, but it isn't real close either. But we were expecting the crowds to come up the street.
Yeah.
I was 14.
So what you're really speaking about is racial profile. Because that's what happened to your son that was traveling with the visa, that's really racial profile.
Yeah.
What you're talking about with Joel is really racial profile because he's a young black man locked in a Chevron.
Right,
That because of the color of his skin, he'd be treated differently, the cop showed up.
right.
Scotty, remember when you first went in the Marines, did they give you the black-white discussion? My sergeant says, black or white, we're all green, everybody bleeds red. We're all green, everybody bleeds red.
It's easy enough to say, but it's hard to live by it, because you can't just change everyone's opinion, and they're all gonna be nicey-nice.
Right.
I grew up in Portland in the 50s. My first boyfriend was black, but I didn't know it until his parents broke us up and told me. He had to tell me why, because I didn't get it. I didn't know there was, I figured somebody that looked like him could be born in my family. I was that naive.
Mhm.
And wish we were all colorblind. I wonder how long it's gonna take.
All right, I'm going to tell you, I was raised around here, and there weren't, when I was being raised, very many people. You know, everybody was white. I didn't see. I only had one experience when I was 5 with somebody who wasn't white. And she was black, and she was a nurse or a caregiver or whatever. And she was responsible for getting me prepped for my surgery. So, I had such a positive, such a wonderful experience with her that all my growing up, even though I never saw anyone else that was black or other dark skin, I never gave it a thought when I did see one. In fact, I was more terrified of nuns. Nuns scare me to this day, and I cross the street. I'm just saying. She was so sweet to me, this little lady. She brushed my hair and combed it and braided it, because it was long, and braided it, and did all the surgery prep for me so I'd be ready to go. And I still remember that. To this day, I was 5. So, and that was such a positive experience, and I never ever had a negative thought. I guess it's learned to a certain degree. It's learned. Because I work with people from Nigeria and Zimbabwe and every other place that I can't remember in South America and Europe. I have worked with people from every country in the world, and I guess I just was raised to not, and it can be done, to not have any of that.
Right. Dana, share your conversation that you had with Lynn about going to school.
You'll have to jump in with me, Joel, because we were both having this conversation. Lynn is our neighbor, and her closest friend for all her growing up was, is it the West family? Is that the last name? It's a member of the West family. And they went to school together.
A black family.
Yeah, a black family, I'm sorry. And she said that in her experience, and well, let's back up. Longview, you guys know how Longview is designed, right? There's the black quarters, there's the laborers' quarters, there's the management quarters, and then there's the upper management quarters. And that still hasn't changed. And so Lynn, she would always go to school with her friends, and she went to school with a lot of blacks. And so she assumed that all of Longview was the same. and every school was the same. And so she never thought any differently of that until she got older and realized that, oh, blacks were only in one area, so poor was only in one area. Management, upper management were in other areas of Longview. And she was almost an adult before she really realized that. And in our conversation, it was interesting because it took her until that adult age to realize that there were some differences, and like you said, is taught. But,
You see, I didn't realize either. I had no realization. If a kid came into my class, we had foreign exchange students in high school that were from, other countries, and it didn't occur to me that they were different than us.
and unfortunately, that is common. And so when you hear the terms systemic racism or something like that, that's really what they're speaking to. That people, that whites in certain communities aren't learning about blacks or other people of color, just like blacks are not really learning about them either in their educational systems.
Yeah, I guess the point that I wanted to shine on is that for the white girl, she was just going to class. For the black girl, that was the class that was the school that was designated as the one for blacks. She didn't have a choice of where she could go to. She was going to the mixed school where everybody else was the white school. And it didn't even cross Lynn's mind that her friend didn't have a choice. She was told what school to go to, and this is the only school you could go to. Her experience, very different experiences, coming from the white side of, well, she was my friend, and I didn't know. And the black experience was, this is the school I was told to go to because I couldn't go to another one. So, systemic racism. Longview was designed for, the church that's down the street from me was the laborers' church. It was the low people's church there by the Highlands, and people were there that were laborers that could go to walk to work. The church that our community has rebuilt, House of Prayer for All Nations now, was designed for the black church, and then Longview Community Church was designed for the executives.
Right.
And that's how the community was designed from the foundation. And laboring people, low-income people generally go to Longview Foursquare. Black people still go to House of Prayer. And Longview Community Church is known for its upper class, yeah.
You remember when they started building the town, it was in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 20s, we didn't have any of the stuff that Martin Luther King talked about. I remember being in the service in '68 when he was murdered, and everybody was mad. The white guys were mad that a white guy killed him. The black guys were mad because a white guy killed him. And I was thinking, like, what's the country coming to? And if you think about that back then, and that stuff that happened in Compton in '64, it was pretty laid back compared to what went on in New York City here recently. That was insane.
Yeah.
And that was more than the black and the white.
Do you still feel that segregation going on in the community now that was here when the community was formed in the 1920s? Do you sense negative feelings against you as a black person? Do you feel like you're discriminated against?
I'm on the Diversity and Equity Committee at the college. And the reason why I joined that committee was last spring. Had a student in a discussion post say, black people need to go back to Africa. And I was angry. student, I was more angry that there wasn't an outlet for me as a person of color.
Yeah.
So do I feel that? It's not all the time, but yeah.
How about you, Joel?
I mean, I would say for myself, no, but I think some of that is due to the friends and family and community that I have surrounded myself with. And I mean, I'm also, the ditzy one who got himself locked in the chaperone bathroom, so what can I say? No, my parents and my friends and family have been around me and protected me and loved me and sheltered me from a lot that has happened, outside of that sphere and that bubble. And so I would say more in the past 2-3 years as I've really become an adult and I'm trying to learn more just about the world around me and form my own opinions about things has my perspective been widened. But I wouldn't say that Longview itself has done anything. So I guess my answer.
And I guess I'd also say that our 3 children have different experiences.
Sure.
Devin has a very different experience than Joel and us. And people would come up to him and run their hands through his hair and, oh, I like your hair and I like your skin. Do people do that to you guys? Why do they do it to my son?
We do that to her daughter Vicky. She has real long hair. It's really soft. It's really fun to run your hands through her hair.
So you know her, it's not a stranger.
Well, she was telling me about it because
Yeah.
she went on a missionary trip to Africa.
Yeah.
And the African people loved her hair. And they would always fuss about it.
Oh, but Brian has that same experience.
Yeah. With Devin, when he was in high school, he had the afro, and his signature was he always had a pick in his hair. There was a reason for it.
A yellow pick.
A yellow pick. He kept the pick with him because people would put their hand on his afro and he'd be able to pick it out and make it nice again. And that became kind of his sign. And even in his dreadlocks, he put a yellow guitar pick in his dreadlocks because that was his thing.
Yeah.
In Africa, everybody, the thought was white skin is like confetti. It's soft and fragile. So all the kids would come up and want to feel my arms, to see to feel for themselves the soft, fragile skin of the white person. So instead of running through my hair, they were always, I would have kids especially just all over me, running their hands on my arms because their thought is that it's so delicate and fragile.
And speaking of Africa, one of the things that inspired me to ask you guys to come, obviously in dealing with this race issue, I mean, you're white, you're black, and the families, did your families reject you, each other? Also then, your story about what happened actually in South Africa for you, and the passport, you had to get a special extra. So those are the few things I was just hoping to hear about too, however much you want to share about it.
So I will start with finishing Brian's thing, and he talked about how the Ghanaians would rub his skin, and they haven't been in South Africa as well.
Yeah.
But one of the things that when we were in Ghana, people called us the white family. We were the white kids because our mannerisms are American. And when we got back, the kids were, what, you guys were 14, 12, and 10 or something like that?
I was, 13.
Or 13, 11, somewhere in there.
I was 10.
You're 10, good.
I can't do math.
So they, essentially 2 years apart, 10, 12, and 14. And so, but Devin and I think Joel even came up and asked me, Mom, are we white or are we black?
Wow.
Because here, it was an important, for lack of a better word, distinction, because everybody began to change and treat our kids as if they were black instead of as if they were just American.
And I guess to also add on to that is what we moved to Africa when I was about 7, 8. And so the years before that, I was young enough and, the world is a playground and you don't care about anything like that. But then I had those formative years, up to 13, where everyone called me white. And then suddenly coming back and stepping into the US and being like, okay, wait a second, what am I? Because you're stepping into it and, you don't have any friends and you're still trying to get to know people and figure out yourself at the same time. So that was a conversation that definitely really had to think about and struggle with for a while.
I actually have many black friends because of environments that I've been in. But I've noticed there's racism in the black culture.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the light-skinned black people would look down on the darker.
Oh, no, when I go home, they all call my kids Oreo.
Wow.
So that is just, yeah, you have Oreo kids, right?
Wow.
But I wanted to touch on what Marv was asking. When Brian and I were in Lesotho, we went as Peace Corps volunteers when we were first married, and U.S. government got it in their head to send us to South Africa. And at the time, it was illegal for us to be married because blacks and whites could not have anything in common. And so in order to get me into Lesotho, which is landlocked by South Africa, they gave me a passport that said honorary white so that I would not get arrested. And so I lived as an honorary white for 2 years while we were in South Africa.
Weird.
So have you guys been affected differently with the BLM protests? Like, has that changed anything for you at all?
Yeah, I would say there's so many different emotions going around that. At first I was just like, well, let's be real, all lives matter, all are a child of God, But, Dad, you and me were having this conversation, yesterday, and how did you put it? The Good Samaritan.
There's two stories that, one I have, let's go ahead and bring up the passage there. Black Lives Matter. Do Black Lives matter? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But I want to make a distinction between.
That's what I was going to say.
I want to make a distinction between the statement and the sentiments and the organization.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's read this passage. Amy, you want to read it out?
See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly, I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish.
Do Black Lives Matter? Does the one that went away matter? Absolutely. We've been called to go after those that have gone astray. So I want to talk, what does it mean to go astray? And what is it that God was really focusing on? I think salvation is part of that. Those that have drifted away because of woundings, because of sin, because of what other people have done, that's drifting away. And we're supposed to go after those. Those that are wounded, brokenhearted, those that have been discriminated against. We need, as a church, are responsible to be going after those that need help. If we're not doing that, then what are we doing as a church? And I was hoping that in our discussion here, we talk about what do we need to do as a church. If we turn a blind eye to those that are hurting and suffering, that is like the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan, of us as a church body going by those that are beaten down and wounded. There are people that are feeling broken down and wounded, that have those long wounds for a long time, that if we just go by with our eyes shielded, saying, I didn't do that, and I didn't own slaves. Yes, you didn't own slaves. I didn't own slaves. I can't repent of something that I haven't done wrong. But we need to bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted. How do we do that as a church? How do we reach out to those that do feel like they have been mistreated and come along with them and, as the Good Samaritan, bind up their wounds and restore them to Christ? I think that I don't have a good answer for that, but yeah.
Right, how does the change really happen? I mean, it's not really, protests aren't gonna change hearts.
Right.
It's a heart problem. What brought it home for me, and I was the same thing, that all lives matter, but what brought it home for me was a guy speaking on Caleb, a black gentleman, that said, if I go out for a run, I have to wonder if I'm coming back, if I'm gonna survive it.
Yeah.
And that hit home for me, just how different it is, just like you said, if a cop pulls you over, move slow, all those things that black people, or it could be Hispanic people, whatever, people that are white and privileged, go through, or has to go through their mind when something happens. Just like Joel being locked in the Chevron, the perception that he was up to no good or something, just because he's a young black man. So how does the change happen? It has to be the heart. The heart of America has to change.
But I think that happens one conversation at a time, right? And as people see injustices in the system, that they change those injustices and speak up, right? Because historically, the church, not just the white church, the church has remained silent on injustices and racial issues, particularly in terms of blacks. And the church needs not to be silent any longer. Now, Jaden, you asked about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And I make the distinction because Black Lives Matter, don't get me wrong. But if they matter, they matter for the George Floyds, they matter for the kids that are aborted, they matter for people with mental health issues, they matter for every single individual, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to speak out against Black lives, the injustices against Black lives, but you also have to speak out against those that are aborted, the Black lives that are aborted. You have to speak out for the Black lives that are incarcerated. You have to speak out for the Black lives that are on addicted to drugs, and all of those things, and not just choose one thing.
I also wanted to ask something else, or it kind of went with what Dad said earlier a little bit, but in school we learned about Claudette, how Claudette was less recognized for what she did, even though she started the bus protest and stuff. But Rosa Parks was more identified as a person that did that.
Right.
It was kind of interesting.
I just like to share something that happened, well, a couple things that happened to us. Number one, our son married a very dark-skinned black gal. And when they were first married, they would be going through a grocery store together, and some good old white boy would come up to him and say, face some racial issues, but I never had any kind of racial issues at all. And I love our daughter-in-law and our grandkids like they have. To me, I don't see the color of skin. I feel their hair because I love the texture of their hair. And it's not because I'm trying to point that out because they're black or anything. I
No,
just,
but they're yours.
it's
and
because
you
I love them.
them.
It's because I love them.
Yeah.
But when I was working full-time over at the healthcare place, we had this gal that worked for us, and I needed to find a caregiver to go to this one client's house. So I said, well, to my boss, I said, let's send Amanda. And she looked at me and she goes, well, you have to call them first to find out if they'll accept her as a caregiver. I said, why? She said, well, because she's black. I said, no, she's not. I did not even see the color of her skin. And that, I believe, is what we have to do, is love people for who they are and not see the color of their skin.
Yeah.
I love you for who you are.
Right, and I guess I'd say that has accepting all of me, my culture,
Yes.
and everything about
Yes.
that,
Yes.
and not denying that.
Virginia's trying.
She's had her hand up for a while here, so
Yeah.
let's Virginia.
I have a caregiver who is probably a shade or two darker than I am. And I never knew until she told me. When she was young, the police stopped her constantly, over and over again. And she always tried to be really nice, but she's a really got aggravating. But until she told me about that, I never knew. Then afterwards, I realized, yeah, that could be. She has Indian, Hispanic, and I don't know what all else, and her parents, through her parents. And I said, you know, I never thought of you being darker than me until you told me that. I never thought of her as even Hispanic,
Right.
and, because she don't speak Spanish.
Don? You got-
When I was first married the first time, I moved away from home. And I went to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Anybody been there?
Nope.
I lived in possibly the worst area. There was nobody white. I was the only, besides my husband, the only white person in 4 or 5 blocks other direction. But you know, maybe I was just naive. But I would walk 2 blocks to the store and back, and I know people looked at me, but I never had any issues, because I didn't have any issues with them. In fact, I remember a lovely old black gentleman, his hair was all white, and he smiled at me. I was trying to get out of the store, and my hands were full, the door wasn't an automatic one, and he held the door open for me, and I said, thank you. It was like they were anyone else. Maybe I was naive, maybe I was dumb even, to go walking in that neighborhood, but, you know, I don't know, early 80s, it could have been pretty bad. I didn't really pay attention to the news, so I didn't have any, you know, thoughts on, well, gee, this is kind of a dangerous move or not.
Yeah.
And that's probably why you were safe, because you just walked in and you treated people like people.
Yeah, just like it was the normal thing to do.
But isn't that like a stereotype, thinking that I'm in a black neighborhood, there's danger here
It's
because
a
I'm a
danger,
white
right.
person? Yeah. Because
I
not
mean,
all
is this-
blacks, not all blacks obviously commit crimes, are gonna go out and hurt you just because you walk through their neighborhood.
Right.
But there was more than black, there was every nationality you can imagine.
Right.
And every neighbor in my fourplex was black. We had some good times.
Good. Marv asked about kind of my experiences with the interracial marriage. When we were dating, we went to Pike's Place Market, and I had got Dana some flowers, and we were obviously googly eyes and loves and stuff, walking down the Pike's Place Market together, and a black guy came up to us and said, talked to Dana and said, "Why are you going crossing over?" Something up to that effect. Got in my face and said, "Why are you," or her face, and "why are you going outside your race?" And said, "You're doing it wrong. You should stick to your race." That was before we got married. And then after our Peace Corps experience, we were in upstate New York for a couple of years, and I was working there for a gentleman as a caregiver or something, and one-on-one, he, not knowing that I was a part of an interracial marriage, he shared with me how horrible blacks were, and how he hated blacks, and my take home from that is a lot of times blacks don't hold back, and they'll get in your face, and they'll tell you to your face what they think. Whites in general won't do that face to face, but they'll go among their own.
Passive aggressive.
Passive aggressive, and they'll talk to somebody else about them. Or so I mean that's kind of what I've experienced, and really I haven't had a lot. Thank God there hasn't been a lot of real negative stuff. Most people are very loving and accepting, and not an issue.
Great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, probably if we've had any kind of negative responses, it's been out of the black community and not out of white communities.
Yeah.
I think it was probably 3-4 years ago. Maybe not. No. It was when we had our 30th wedding anniversary, and my father called me and he said, "Congratulations." He said, "No one thought you would succeed." He said, and kind of the same thing. He said they were hoping you would, but in the background they were saying they're not going to last.
Wow.
Thank God we've lasted.
Absolutely. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Still trying to form the thoughts.
Hi, sister.
Hi, brother. So within our family, we've had a lot of different racial problems too. Like my grandma T, mom's mom, she calls my father a honorary black because he's obviously white. And just her way of accepting my dad is to call him an honorary black. She's like, "Oh yeah, he's my black son." And things like that. So there's also the different thing within our family that's like, she's trying her hardest to accept, but she doesn't know exactly how to accept my dad. So she just calls him her black son.
Have you experienced any racial?
So not as much as my oldest brother Devin. He's obviously had it the worst, but or at least out of us kids. But I've had it some. I am slightly darker than Joel at times.
That's all
If
right.
it's not much stuff, I know it's not fine. So I can get darker than Joel. So I do get a little bit more than him, but not as much as Devin does because he's the darkest out of us for kids.
Wow.
Joel is the only one that shares sunburns with me. Devin got pretty dark just last weekend. He got a little bit toasty, but yeah.
Is there ever, between the African Americans, is there ever, like, between you guys, like, who's darker, who's lighter, any of that kind of thing?
You mean between the kids?
Just between anyone you
In the
know.
race there is.
Oh, and the race, definitely.
And that was an eye-opener to me, because there's a friend of mine named Carl, and he was extremely dark. And my friends that were lighter skinned black men called him black. They just told him black. That was how they nicknamed him, and they looked down on him because of the color of his skin. And that was mind-blowing to me. I still don't get that.
Yeah. South Africa was especially bad when it comes to that. They really classed you by how dark or how light your skin was. And you can change the laws, but it takes more to change the hearts of people. I have not been back there since they've changed the laws. So I don't know what it's like now, but certainly the darker you were, the lower class you were.
Yeah, that's the way they treat you.
And
And the harder
it
you were
goes
treated,
here. And they have actually cream that's really bad for your skin to try to lighten your skin to look more white.
Wow. Did they even do that within families if a couple children were lighter and one was darker?
Oh, absolutely. They do that in the States.
Yeah.
If your kids, I mean,
And your family.
I've been living in Washington, which has really no sun. But when I was growing up, California has a lot of sun, and so I was the darkest kid. And so I was the least privileged kid, yes.
I always wanted a little color though.
Me too. Me too.
Birds are easy.
Me too. You want to?
I was just gonna say, from our time in the Dominican, you know, the Dominican Republic and Haiti share an island. Haiti is much more dark than the Dominican side, and Haitians actually have a hard time getting work in the Dominican Republic because of the color of their skin. It's so much darker, they're looked down upon.
Yeah.
And I came back from the first trip, and we were, you know, of course, racial tensions were what they are, and I'm just like, you know, these people on both sides of this subject need to go and look at what true racism is between the Dominicans and the Haitians.
On that one
And they
little
would
island.
realize, we've got it great, you know, and, I mean, personally, I just wish that there's only one race.
Yeah.
You know, we are the human race.
Amen.
You take us back to only two people, and within a few generations, all the colors are gonna be back to you.
Yeah.
That's, you know, that's the way God created us.
Yeah.
But yeah, the time in the Dominican really opened my eyes, because growing up in Longview, I really didn't see racism, but then we didn't have very many black families around.
Right.
So it's just not something to talk about.
I have an ignorance question. You said that sometimes you're darker than your brother. Do you actually do sun down?
Yeah.
And get darker?
They do. Yeah, they do.
I also do burn,
Yeah.
not as easy as that. But you guys don't lay in the sun to actually tan. That just happens naturally.
I know when I was still living at home in high school, Star Trek was on. And I thought Uhura was probably the prettiest woman on television. And I made a comment to a friend of mine about that, and his comment was, and there's no blacks at all in Capilano. He says, she's not bad for a black. And I thought, what in the world? And I thought, you know, to me, it doesn't make sense. And the topper was my great aunt. Whenever she came to visit, she got my bedroom because it had a nice bed in it and this and that. Well, I had pictures on the wall of the Supremes, and she just about come unglued. I had black women on my wall. And I never paid any attention to that. I liked their music, and I thought all three of them were nice looking ladies.
one thing. Yeah, go ahead.
In my experience growing up, you know, obviously I grew up in Kelso. There's not a lot of diversity in color. But with people that were fought in World War II or the Korean War, there was a definite bias, racism against Asians. You know,
Yeah.
it was, anybody you talk to in that war, and I won't say anybody, but in general, they had a negative opinion of it. And when I went to LCC, it just so happened to be the time where Vietnam War ended, and there was a lot of refugees that came over to the U.S. from Vietnam. And there was 4 Vietnamese guys in school, and they didn't speak English very well. And so they would be taking the electronics course that I was in. And I don't know if everybody in the class was the same, but in general, nobody wanted to help them. You know, they wouldn't take the time to help them. Now, whether that was their own problems or racism or whatever, I don't know. But the only thing that I could see was somebody wanting to learn something and they needed help, and so I spent the time to make that gap, bridge that gap communication-wise with them and explain what the, you know, our instructor just taught to us, you know, in time that you know, that they could understand it and spend enough time with them, because he went through it so quickly they couldn't keep up. But all I could think about is that I've always approached everybody that way. It's like, spend the time, show your love by your actions.
Yes,
You know, and prejudice and racism is a learned thing that people, you know, are taught when they're young, and they share that, and they teach other people how to be racist. You know, and you got to break that down, those barriers, and you can only do it individually, one-on-one with each person you meet up with.
How does the hymn go? And yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love.
Exactly. Exactly, for sure. Thank you guys so much for sharing your stories.